Okay, everyone, so now for the discussion questions. So for the first one, the readings for this week, specifically Sean's article and the article from Schultz, discuss how an object can shift in meaning when its geographical and cultural context changes. Consider the Pisa Griffin's name. Is this a Pisan artifact? Is it Islamic? Is it Al-Andalusian? Christian? What are the benefits and limitations to identifying an object by its current context? So think about these two articles, and more specifically, the way that Sean discusses Islamic spolia and how the identities of items such as the flags shift depending on their location, and sort of think about this in context or in relationship to the Pisa Griffin. For number two, consider the way in which Cassidy Welch and Lester discuss the concept of collective memory and official remembrance, and how these concepts can be connected to objects. How could the Pisa Griffin have been, and still be, quote, used to motivate, include and exclude, establish identity, and envisage the future in the city of Pisa? So that's a quote from the Cassidy Welch and Lester article. So for this one, it's important to refresh your memories, no pun intended, on the concept of memory and remembrance and how this differs from historical narrative. So it might be helpful to think of an object or ritual in the United States that reflects a collective memory that we still hold on to, or that we've been, or that we still promote. The authors give important examples of major events in the article. So both World Wars and 9/11 are these events that we have very particular collective memories surrounding. Okay, number three. Why do you think a copy of the Griffin was made and placed atop the cathedral in the same spot as the original after it was moved into the museum? What does this copy say about the Pisans' collective memory of the object? So again, just think about this concept of collective memory and how it relates to the veneration of objects. For number four, this semester we have come to understand that cross-cultural relationships between communities across the Mediterranean were extremely rich and common. Trade and gift-giving existed among Islamic and Christian communities. Do you believe that the method in which the Pisa Griffin came to Pisa, so the fact that it was most likely looted rather than traded or gifted, changes its meaning or purpose in its Pisan context? So for this question, I was comparing the object to a gift that we learned about, the Geographia book that was used as a gift for Ottoman princes. And this is talked about in the Roberts reading from week 2. So it might be helpful to think back to week 2 and this reading, just to use as a comparison. But think about whether the way things are exchanged across communities is worth considering when thinking about an object's shifting context. For number 5, consider the new location of the Pisa Griffin in the Museo dell'Opera del Duomo. So, with the contextualization of this object in our current awareness of its Islamic origins, does the meaning or message behind it change? If so, in what ways? So, what is the significance of the object's relocation in this museum? It might help to think back to discussions we've had in Molly's class about the Museo del Duomo in Florence, or even just how any objects are displayed in museums that we've visited. So think back to the rug that Katie presented us in the Bargello, and what kind of objects are surrounding it, and what kind of objects are in the next room. So apparently the Griffin is displayed with other quote-unquote foreign objects, or objects that didn't originate in Pisa. So think about what that means and why that matters. Obviously, we don't have access to that actual space, but just think about what I'm telling you now, that it's displayed around, or it's displayed in a room with other objects that didn't have Pisan origins. And lastly, for number 6, Sean proposes the idea that Islamic spolia were material metonyms for Christian victory during the early modern period. Scholars similarly argue that the Pisa Griffin was probably taken as war booty. Think back to our museum visits to the Bargello and the Museo Archeologico Nazionale, and our discussions about the colonial nature of each museum. Do such artifacts still act as material metonyms for colonial victory in their museum contexts? So, the topic of how museums are a continuation of colonial narratives is something that we have brought up several times in this class. So try to think back to these discussions and relate them to our themes with this week, such as collective memory and the influence of Islamic art specifically.